We've done preview videos together. We've done in-season videos together. And now with the season finally over, we are almost over. We are doing a NFL playoff prediction video. Me and Mathis here are going to give you our playoff predictions. And I don't know about you, Mathis, but at least for me, this was kind of a hard NFL playoffs to predict. There have been just a lot of noise around different teams. I feel like there's more than one team that really can win it all this year. I can think of a ton off the top of my head from each conference and a lot of different potential matchups in both title games, mainly the Super Bowl. So this one will be a very intriguing playoffs, I think, personally, just to watch. Even if some of the teams might not make the Super Bowl, I think there's a lot of intriguing wild card and maybe divisional round games, and there's just a lot that could happen. So obviously, we're going to give our predictions here. Of course, some of them might be subject to change, just of our opinion based on injuries or maybe how the team does versus performance. Let's say in the wild card round they don't have as good a performance as we thought. That might change our opinion in the next round. So this is all from the very beginning of the playoffs at the start. We're recording this on Wednesday. It'll probably come out late Wednesday or Thursday. So just so you know, in case anything major comes out, this is when we're recording it. So that's why our opinions are like this. But I'm ready to go. I got some good stuff, Mathis. What's your first initial thoughts on the playoffs?
Yeah, I think like what you said, it's a lot of variance this year. I think it helps when you have like a 13-win team or a 14-win team as the number 5 seed this year. I mean, that's, I feel like, one of the first times ever, I think, in NFL history that we've had a team that good be a wild card team. So that definitely shakes some things up in the NFC. And then you have some other teams in the AFC that are kind of falling off a little bit towards the end of the season, like the Texans and the Steelers. Some other teams kind of getting hot at the right time. So definitely a lot of things going on. But once you get into the tournament, really anything can happen. So it's definitely going to be pretty exciting to see how it all shakes out.
Yes, for sure. Now, I don't think we need to waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and dive into the matchups. I'm going to go through them. I have my predictions. Mathis has his. We don't know each other's, so we will go through each round separately and give our analysis on each one and our thoughts on why. Maybe comment on each other's if we have some differing stuff. In terms of the first round, I'll just go down based on the teams that play first, and we'll go game by game. And I think at least for what I want to do is I'll just say, let's talk about Chargers Houston, and then Mathis will give his opinion and his take on that game, and we'll see if we have the same matches. Once we get to the next rounds, it'll obviously be different, and we'll go ahead and separately talk about our matchups if we have different teams playing each other. So let's start off with the Chargers at the Houston Texans. This is an interesting game that I think honestly might be a potential slugfest of a game. This is the lowest over-under so far of the wild card weekend. And it could be kind of a gotcha game with the Texans being home underdogs. Obviously, that is something that a lot of people like to see in the betting market, as the Chargers are 3-point favorites for a reason, to be honest. The Texans come in kind of limping, being the last division winner, kind of in the weakest division in the AFC with, I don't know, they're kind of beat up a little bit, and they're a team with, I definitely think, a good amount of holes. The Chargers, they turn the ball over the least in the NFL. They have 2 great tackles. They can really run the ball, and just they're the real antithesis of what Houston's defense really wants to see, in my opinion. They also don't have this crazy big home field advantage. Houston doesn't. They've got blown out by the Ravens at home. They recently lost to the Titans, and both of these games were at home. So C.J. Stroud, obviously not the season that he's had before. I've talked about it a little bit on the podcast in terms of kind of what I maybe expected him to do. And we obviously do our quarterback rankings, and that'll be something we can get into later. So you can see that probably in 2 months or so maybe is when we do the yearly quarterback rankings video. But I'm going to go ahead. I feel more confident. I know it's home underdogs. I understand that's a little scary, but a road team wins at least once or twice. Once for sure, though, a road team does win in the wild card, and I think an easy pick and one that I will make confidently will be the Chargers over Houston. What is your pick in this game, Mathis?
Yeah, I went with Los Angeles as well. I think, like you said, a very popular pick. I feel like just because of how these two teams have ended the regular season, with the Texans obviously really struggling, and then the Chargers kind of running the table almost, like having a really good end of the season. At a point, it was like, are they going to be the 7 seed? Are they going to win 9 or 10 games? And you look up, the number 5 seed, the top odd card team for the AFC. So I think the Chargers have a lot of momentum. And I do think it could get fairly interesting just because of Texans. Their defense is really, really good, especially in the secondary. But as kind of you stated, the strength of the Chargers' team is not their passing attack. They love to run the football, use J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards in the backfield. So I think although Ladd McConkey, he could have a lot of attention on him, not have the greatest game, I do think when you just combine Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert, and just how physical and good that Chargers defense has been this year, I do think they could squeak out kind of a narrow win on the road. But I mean, it definitely wouldn't shock me if Houston kind of won a 17-14 ball game or something like that. But I'm just going to trust kind of the proven head coach. I know DeMeco Ryans won a playoff game as a rookie last year, but if we're taking resumes in totality, I'm going to side with Jim Harbaugh. And just with the momentum that each of these teams have, I think the Chargers just make more logical sense to me at this point.
Yep, we got Chargers win there. Pittsburgh at Baltimore. This is just another Steelers playoff show. Hey, we made the playoffs. Here we are. We're better run than all these other organizations. But it's another one where I don't think they do anything. The Steelers are not playing great as of late, and they just really seem like a step behind these other elite playoff teams, and they happen to be playing one in Baltimore. I know that the Steelers know this Ravens team more than anyone because it's their division. But especially with Baltimore being at home, give me the Ravens easy, no issue. I assume you have the same.
Yeah, I took Baltimore. It always is interesting when you play a division opponent 3 times in a season because, I mean, like you said, they just know each other so well. But I just remember just a couple of weeks ago, the Ravens obliterated them on their home turf. And again, this is going to be in Baltimore. So again, same thing with the momentum that I said. The Steelers, I mean, they've had a really tough end of the season, and the Ravens kind of jumped them. They were like 2 games behind the Steelers for first place in the division, and now they're the 3 seed, and the Steelers are the 6 seed. I just think Baltimore has too many playmakers. I don't think Zay Flowers is going to play in this game, but I still think Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, it's going to be enough to put up too many points for Russell Wilson and that Steelers offense, which has been one of the worst in the league, really the last month or so of the season.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting if Zay Flowers doesn't play. I wonder if they make that decision because he might be good to go, but do they decide? I assume they will because they don't want to take any risks.
Yeah.
But if you're looking realistically, maybe they could say, hey, we can beat this team without him and we want to keep him healthy for next round, which would be a huge game. So we'll see what happens there. Next is Denver at Buffalo. The line for this game that I've seen started at 10 points, went down to 9.5. Now it's at 8.5, so it keeps getting smaller and smaller for Buffalo. Denver is a very high floor team, and I think they will have the better coached team for sure. I think that's just true. It's just when I'm looking at it, it's a rookie quarterback on the road in Buffalo, which is a really good team, obviously, and there's just a big talent mismatch. Give me Buffalo, but it's not a blowout, and I wouldn't be shocked if maybe people who, I don't know, maybe bet Buffalo or something to blow them out, they don't hit and they get scared because I feel like just how well coached Denver is and just seem like a very high floor team. I cannot pick them to win, and I don't really think they will, but it wouldn't insanely shock me if they did, and I think they might give them a little bit more run for their money than people think, with this being, I think, the second largest line behind the Ravens in Pittsburgh. Do you have a Broncos upset in this game, or are you sticking with the general Bills pick?
I still pick the Bills, but I really do agree with about everything you said in that game. Just regarding kind of the matchup, the Broncos are not a great, if I was the Bills, I don't think I'm this is a layup game. I definitely think Denver's going to be a tough out, and it's just because they have the best pass rush in terms of sacks produced this season in the league. They've got the best cornerback in the league, so their defense is not going to be a gimme. I mean, although Josh Allen has had an MVP season, the Bills are loaded with offensive talent. I don't think they're going to struggle to score points, but it's not going to be like going up against the Lions like they did a couple of weeks ago when they put up 40 points, or that Rams game. There's going to be a little bit of resistance there. So that's going to be something to watch. And then the Broncos do run the ball fairly well, and they've got a very physical offensive line. And I saw something on Twitter, I think a couple of days ago, of somebody kind of breaking down why they don't believe in the Bills a ton. for the postseason. It's because of their interior, their defensive line. It's pretty weak. Ed Oliver, he's more of like a pass rusher. He's not one guy that you want to, be the big run stuffer in the middle of your defense. So if the Broncos can average like 4.5, 5 yards a carry, just running it up in the middle over and over again, which they have been kind of efficient doing the last half of the season, this could be a game when you look up at halftime. Maybe it's a 3-point tied ball game, and it takes some heroic Josh Allen plays to come in with the victory, because the Bills, although they have had their fair share of some blowout wins, they've also had some pretty close wild card games in recent memory at home. I remember the game against Phillip Rivers, I think in his last game ever. That was a very tight ball game in the fourth quarter. The Dolphins with Skylar Thompson in the wild card round, that was a very close game as well that came down to the last possession. So I don't think the Bills are just shoot in to blow this team out by 20 points. But I mean, I guess either way, I couldn't say it really would shock me if they did, because you mentioned the rookie quarterback. But I would say I feel pretty good about Denver keeping it relatively close, but the Bills just get away with Josh Allen making a couple of key plays down the stretch.
Yeah, I think if this was a different formatted team, because the Broncos are a bottom 5 rushing team in the NFL, maybe it would hurt them more. But we'll see. Obviously, they might see them next round in a potential game versus the Ravens. Now we get to the NFC, Green Bay at Philadelphia. This one is kind of odd, as both of these teams have, I think, potential, and I think a lot of people could see them going on some kind of explosive run, but they also, at the same time, have some injury issues coming into the game with both teams' quarterbacks. In this case, if I'm just comparing the rosters, Philadelphia just really has the edge here, and the Packers they don't have Watson. Dobbs is hurt. Love, I've seen more and more stuff of him getting closer and closer to game time, of him not being 100% certain if he's even going to play. And Hurts still has his concussion protocol, but everyone seems to be thinking that it's going to be fine, as long as he just doesn't have a major setback. But even if he does, going into this game with a Kenny Pickett or Tanner McKee, could they lose? Yeah, absolutely. But even if I'm thinking that, I personally still would pick the Eagles. I just really think their roster is better. I think the Packers are slightly limping in here, and I think the Packers just don't really have a ton else that's actually better than the Eagles to make up for the difference that might occur in, like, I don't know, let's say the secondary or the linebackers, the D-line, but none of that is really the thing. I think the Eagles just beat them out in every kind of facet except, let's say, quarterback. And in this case, I still think the team is able to make up for that. So especially the run defense, Packers' run defense is not amazing. So definitely give me Philly here. And what I'll say is I'm relatively confident in, which might shock some people. I know some people have maybe Green Bay winning that game. Let's see, Mathis, do you have Green Bay winning this game?
No, I got Philly for many of the same reasons you said. It is a little bit of a weird matchup because you have Love kind of hurt coming into this game. You have Hurts potentially just maybe even being a little bit rusty because he hasn't really practiced in a couple of weeks now. But, I mean, their philosophy in offense is to run the ball with Saquon, and even Hurts, if he's healthy. He's not, a timing passer where he needs to kind of have a ton of reps in that sense. So I think Philly will just have enough on the ground, and I think their defense has been just really, really good since Vic Fangio. They revamped their secondary. Their pass rush has been kind of back this year. So I think Philly kind of overwhelms them a little bit. And, maybe I could see Philly getting up a lot early, and then the Packers, they've kind of done this a lot this season where Love just kind of airs it out and they kind of make the score look closer than it actually is. But I think it will be a pretty commanding win for Philly.
Yeah, agreed. Now we have, I think these next two games, I think the AFC wild card is more streamlined, easier to pick. The NFC is kind of harder.
For sure.
These next two games were harder to pick. Washington at Tampa Bay. The Commanders come in, obviously, with a star rookie quarterback having some good wins under their belt. What does it for me in this game, because I looked into it a good amount, and there's three big reasons for me. Number one, the Commanders on the road have just not been the same team. Number two, obviously, rookie quarterback on the road in a playoff game is not an ideal scenario. And number three, the defensive mismatch, while not crazy different, it's just too much. especially in the secondary, pass rush, run defense. It all really leads Tampa, and Tampa, I think, can really take advantage of the lack of secondary and pass rush, and even just run defense. I mean, their run game's been picked up a ton with Bucky Irving. So while some people I could see having Washington, I understand, I feel like it would be more of a, hey, I'm looking strictly at only a few things, and that's why I'm picking them. And Tampa Bay's in the AFC, in the NFC South, and it's a bad division, and then they almost didn't make it or whatever. But I think if you objectively look at this team, their highs have been really high. I mean, they've had some great wins under their belt, Tampa has, and they were injured in the middle of the year. I still think they have limitations on their defense and offensive line for sure. But in terms of just this matchup here, especially it being at home, I do think Todd Bowles is really going to blitz the crap out of this offense. And while they could really get some issues there with Jaden Daniels, I just think the other aspects of Tampa's offense against this defense, if Tampa gets one or two good drives against them, it could just be over, So I'll go ahead and go Tampa here. What did you pick in this matchup?
Well, we're 5 for 5. I picked Tampa as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I like Tampa. I feel like this may be, if you're just a casual NFL fan, probably one of the more enjoyable games. I just feel like the Commanders and Bucks this year are just kind of two fun teams to kind of just watch and just follow along with. And I just think Baker, he's been tremendous this year, kind of had a career resurgence last year with Tampa Bay, and this year he's been even better. So I think their offense is going to be able to score well against the Commanders. And then you already mentioned Todd Bowles with his kind of scheme against a rookie quarterback, high stakes moment. I think he could force Daniels into a couple turnovers. I will say the back end of the Bucs defense has been banged up. I think Antoine Winfield is going to play in this game. And I also think Marshawn Lattimore is going to play for the Commanders, which is always interesting because of the beef with Mike Evans. So that'll be something to kind of watch. But I do think the Bucs are a little bit vulnerable in the secondary, but it's not like the Commanders have a ton of weaponry outside of Terry McLaurin. And I guess you can throw in Zach Ertz, but I don't think the Commanders can necessarily take advantage of those weaknesses. So I just think the Buccaneers are just a better roster, a more experienced roster, because they were in the playoffs last year. They won a playoff game, competed with the Lions in the divisional round last year. So I think the Buccaneers just find a way to get it done at home.
Agreed. And now the hardest wild card game for sure. Minnesota at the Rams. We were slightly talking about this before recording. I went back and forth on this game. I'll give my analysis, and I'm interested to see who you picked. Again, I went back and forth on this a lot. Vikings had a great year. They lost, obviously, the last game for the number 1 seed, and now they're going to have to go on the road in their first playoff game. Really unfortunate for them. This is versus a Rams team that has been really up and down. Not fully healthy, but when they're healthy, it seems like they can really compete with anyone with their wins that they've had, one of them obviously being Buffalo. If I didn't see let's just say if the Lions-Vikings game hypothetically didn't happen, maybe it wasn't for the 1 seed, maybe they rested players in whatever fashion. If that game didn't happen, I'd be pretty confidently picking the Vikings, especially due to the Rams secondary. But the Lions may have really showed a potential game plan in that game. Darnold just really missed a lot of throws in that game from extended blitzes and pressures from Aaron Glenn and the Lions defense. And the Lions don't even have that great of pass rush personnel, and they still did a great job. The Vikings are their O-line. I mean, the tackles they have. I mean, they have a lot of good stuff. I mean, obviously, the coordinators, tackles, obviously insane receiving core, at least in terms of the number 1, and Jordan Addison's good, TJ Hawkinson. The offense is good. The defense has been much better than expected, and Brian Flores has done a great job. The Vikings they're below average in terms of red zone offense. The Rams are above average in red zone defense. So even if the Vikings win the turnover battle like they always seem to do this year, it does not guarantee a touchdown, and that's literally what happened against the Lions. The Vikings on the road, they don't really have a big win, and they get in some really close games on the road with teams like the Jaguars, the Bears. Plus, you don't even have to dive in. Just think, okay, McVay and Stafford at home with the healthy team, especially if Rob Havenstein is good to go, their offensive tackle. That's really hard to pick. And what did it for me is at least one underdog in terms of the betting markets, at least one every single year, basically every single year, has won in the wild card. And if it's not going to be any of the ones I picked above, because none of the ones above are going to be are underdogs that I picked. The closest one was obviously Tampa and Washington, and then you have Chargers and Houston. If at least one normally wins, I think it's going to be this one right here. I know Vikings, and I understand the pick, and I'm totally fine with it. But I personally, just based on that stuff, I'm going to go the Rams. And I'm interested to see if you agreed and we are 6 or 6, or if this is our first differing pick.
Well, we went 6 for 6 because I also picked the Rams to win this game.
Okay.
Did
you think I was going to go Vikings?
I did think you were going to go Vikings. I thought this was going to be.
I thought you were going to go Vikings. Okay, interesting.
Like you said, I just kind of get spooked out with that Lions game. Maybe it could just be, I was telling you before we recorded, like there's always one game where everybody kind of picks one side and then it's usually just wrong. This could be maybe that game where a lot of people side with the Rams.
Where they all feel close and they just slightly think it's the Minnesota, and then they're all like, oh man, why didn't we pick the Rams? Yeah, I agree.
So I just think maybe the Vikings game against the Lions was just a huge outlier, and they come back. Yeah. They kind of get back on track, because I think Darnold, he's going to have a lot of pressure on him this week after that performance against the Lions, because I mean he's playing for a new contract, and if he follows up last week's performance with another pretty bad one, he's going to cost himself a lot of money, and I don't know. I don't know how he's going to respond to that. That's kind of the key for me in this game. Is Darnold going to be missing a lot of throws again? I mean, he had several just in the red zone, inside the 10, 5-yard line, where you're like, dude, just put it out there for Jefferson and Addison, but he's overthrown these guys by 10 yards. So if he can kind of settle down, I do think the Vikings, obviously have a great chance in this game because of all their talent. But I'm just a little bit spooked out. I think I could see Darnold kind of coming back to earth a little bit, and the Rams getting a lot of pressure on him and him just not playing very well again. I will say about the Rams, though, I'm a little bit sketched out with their offense, because their offense outside of the Bills game has been pretty atrocious, I would say, the last month or so of the season. I mean, they struggled against the Saints. They struggled against the 49ers. I mean, Stafford hasn't really been great, and Cooper Kupp kind of looks over the hill a little bit. So, I don't know. Maybe Flores has a good plan. He's had some success against the Rams in the past. So, that's always a factor there. But
this is not a perfect, this is not a perfect pick either way, to be honest. It's hard, but I agree. I think if I'm just looking at it straight up, do you trust Darnold? And while he's had an amazing year, and I think has played like a top 5 quarterback, I think 5 maybe at the highest is what I would say, I still think he needs to prove it. I still do. I think in terms of big moments, he needs to prove it. And I'm sorry if my pick, it's going based off his biggest game. And
I mean,
I don't think there's much wrong with that. So,
I would even say with Kevin O'Connell, I mean, he's got to prove he can. I mean, last time he was in the playoffs, he lost to Daniel Jones. So,
and he's great. He's a great coach, offensive, coach of the year, whatever. I'm just saying the red zone over the season kind of concerns me. How much that they don't just go over. And I think in the playoffs they could face a team. I mean, the Rams do it. They can rely on Kyren Williams in the run. They can do that when they also can go here. It seems like this team never wants to rely on the run at all. And I know he had a great year again, but for me, Darnold just has to prove it. And the more that the matchup says that you need to rely on Darnold, the more worried I just get. He could totally be good. He could totally be good. I'm sorry, but I got to see it first. It's year one.
Another underlying is O'Connell worked under McVay, so does that give McVay kind of an advantage here in terms of preparation and all that stuff? So, I'll take the more proven coach and quarterback at home. That's kind of what it comes down to for me. But again, would not be surprised at all if the Vikings kind of even won controllably. I mean, definitely could happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the spread there, last time I checked, was like 2, and then I went back and it was 1.5, and now it is 1. So it is slowly going in the Rams' direction. Now we get to the divisional, which we all have the same matchup, so this will be much easier. We'll start off with the Chargers at the Chiefs. I looked at a few other people's just to get a lay of the land. Obviously, I saw a majority Chiefs, but I did see, honestly, more Chargers than you would think, for sure. and it has been kind of seen as like a slight split. I'd say maybe 60-40 in terms of favoring Kansas City. The Chargers, they've got a pass rush that can really take a toll on this offensive line for the Chiefs. But I mean, Mahomes, he's won so many games before while being healthy and having just being rushed a ton. So it's not like that's impossible, but it doesn't help having your offensive line really be down against this pass rush. They've played each other twice already. Kansas City won both in close games. And I know that we're going to bring up, the 3-0, being a team 3 times in a year. And I want to bring up this stat at least. And it says, while it may seem like going 3-0 versus a team in the same season is really hard and you got to maybe pick the other side, the stats say that a high majority of the time, if the team is at home for that final third game, the team that is up 2-0, if they're at home for that final third game, they win a good majority of the time. So I know it's kind of a fallacy that people think of. I'd say if this team's on the road, for sure, think about that. But in this one, they're at home. Plus, I mean, Kansas City, they've just owned the end-of-game situations in both of those games, and they weren't the refs' help as much as people want to look at it. I know some people go on about the refs. I'd say in this season, maybe 2 or 3 times I could say sure. Other times, though, blocked field goals, other stuff. It's not refs. It's just preparation and a good amount of luck, and you need luck to win Super Bowls, and it'd be lying if they said they weren't one of the luckiest teams in the NFL. But in terms of late game situations, they've really owned it, and they've done everything they could before in the game to have them be in good positions when the game hits 2 minutes or so. So I'm also just not going to pick Kansas City off a bye in the playoffs. That's not something I'm going to do. So give me Kansas City here.
Yeah, Kansas City for me as well. I ultimately just think the talent discrepancy, I just don't think the Chargers are quite there yet. I think in a couple of years, this could be definitely a very competitive game.
Maybe.
Yeah, but I just think for right now, I just think Kansas City will they do play similar styles, at least this version of the Chiefs, just kind of ball control, relying on the defense, and then just kind of, using your quarterback to make some key plays here and there. But I think Kansas City will take this game. Could be close like the first 2, but I think just at Arrowhead, a couple of the weeks of rest and preparation, I just don't see how you could pick the Chargers, in good faith here.
Yeah, I will say if there were to be one team just in this playoffs that could do a Lions style or, not Giants, but whatever other kind of wild card team that makes a big upset surprise run, it could be the Chargers because they are built for the playoffs in terms of the way they play. But I agree. I just don't think their personnel is there yet. But the reason that happens is because we don't think it's as good as they are, and then it turns out they are. So maybe that happens. We'll see. But I'll definitely go Kansas City here. The Rams at the Lions. Lions will probably face either the Rams or Minnesota unless Washington obviously beats Tampa. Which obviously is going to be interesting for both of these games. Very intriguing. But I think the Rams is a harder game for them than Minnesota. Stafford, revenge again. He's trying to do it for the second time. Obviously playing them in the regular season, playing in the playoffs last year, and he's been losing in close games each one. If Detroit was fully healthy, or relatively fully healthy in terms of having all their main starters there, maybe give or take one guy here or there, they would be my Super Bowl pick without question. And I wouldn't even look at this game. But it makes it a little tougher. The Rams' most recent loss with actual, all their main players was versus the Eagles, where they lost by double digits at home. And this is when you look at play styles in terms of relying on the run and stuff, they're not the same, but Detroit kind of does some similar stuff there. And I think the only thing that can really beat the Lions at home is a real game changer at quarterback. And Stafford is really, really good. He was I'd say 5 or 6 or something on both of our quarterback rankings list last year. He'll be maybe a little lower, but not too far off there. And in the playoffs, he's seemed to, step up at least a little bit and has obviously won a Super Bowl. I just don't think he is at that point in his career like the guys I'm talking about, like a Josh Allen. And if they don't get pressure on him, if Detroit doesn't get pressure on Stafford enough, it could be a problem for sure. But they are top 5 in pressure rate. And this year, under pressure, Stafford has been pretty bad. So I will go ahead and I will say Detroit goes on and wins this game. Do you have Detroit winning, or are you looking at this and giving the Rams a shot here?
No, I like Detroit in this game. I do think it's interesting though, especially with Stafford. I think a big part of the reason why I think I like the Lions is because of their home field advantage. It's pretty.
Mm-hmm.
It's a probably one of the best in these playoffs. And Stafford, who's played there, for like a decade, he's kind of used to that environment. So I think that's why last year that was a pretty good playoff game. And really, anytime he's gone up, I mean, even the beginning of the season when he played there, another close game. So I think Stafford can keep this game relatively close, but I just think the secondary for the Rams is not going to be able to hold up against the Lions. I mean, this is one of the best offenses we've seen in several years. I think David Montgomery is going to be back for that game as well, so you're going to have him.
Probably,
yeah.
yes.
You're going to have Gibbs, and then just Jamison Williams, Laporta, St. Brown. I mean, they're just loaded all across the board. A great offensive line. I just think it's going to be too much for Stafford and the Rams offense to kind of overcome. So I like Detroit in that game, kind of in a shootout, but I just, again, think the firepower is just too much.
Yeah, which, I mean, think about it. That's why that one game was huge. They get a rest, or the fight for the 1 seed. They get a rest with Montgomery, and they don't have to go to L.A. because the only times they've played the Rams with, since the Stafford and Goff trade has been at Detroit. So, I think a good point bringing up the home field advantage. I think that matters a ton for them. So, that's huge. Tampa Bay at Philadelphia. Tampa Bay has really had Philly's number in these past few games, and I know that some have taken Tampa Bay in this game. I think I saw a major YouTuber have Tampa Bay winning this game and going to the NFC title game. But if you look into those games, the last one specifically in the regular season, it was at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay had Chris Godwin, and they were a much healthier team. And Philadelphia didn't have A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith or Cooper DeJean. And now Philadelphia's at home, and Tampa Bay doesn't have the players I mentioned, and they've gotten some secondary injuries like you mentioned. Jordan Whitehead is the main one, their other safety, and their run defense is below average. So I really think the two games that Tampa Bay has won against them have kind of been a fluke. The last one I just mentioned, the injuries, and the one before that, that team was totally falling apart, and the coordinators were terrible. And if the coordinators aren't good in Philly, Sirianni is not going to really do much to help that. So I think that they really stumbled into the playoffs last year when they were facing Tampa Bay. So I think Philly's in a pretty good spot here to win this game. So I would kind of comfortably take Philadelphia in this matchup.
Yeah, I'm taking Philly as well. I do think Tampa is an interesting team for them. I just think Todd Bowles, he knows how to kind of limit the rushing ability of the quarterback. And when Jalen Hurts is kind of forced to stay in the pocket and beat you with his arm, that's where he can, be had. But I think Philly, with how they've been playing, especially at home, I think it's just going to be tough for Tampa Bay. I mean, as you mentioned, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown will be back for this game, so that I think that is going to give a boost to their passing attack. But I just think the coordinating of Fangio and having Kellen Moore is going to help Philly kind of get back to, where they were a couple of years ago in this spot. So I think Philly, just a more talented team. I'll take them over Tampa Bay.
Then the biggest one, definitely, if this plays out as we think. And I think it'll play out just anyways, in general. Disregard everything else. I think this will be the case anyways. This is Baltimore at Buffalo. This is seen as one of the hardest games to pick, and I get it for sure. I'm interested to see if we have our first difference here. I could give you a lot of different stuff, but I'm just going to put it in perspective for you, at least for my analysis, in my opinion. We have the luxury of not just getting assumptions and stuff. These teams actually played, and Baltimore won by 25. But it was at Baltimore. I understand that. But does it now, being at Buffalo, make up for 25 points without any major injuries on each side, coming back or not occurring? I don't think so. Buffalo's run defense is very much below average. While the home field advantage in Buffalo can mean more than others, the Ravens are literally built for that kind of style of play anyways. I know it's easy to compare the quarterbacks and just pick that game based off that, which I've seen most people do. and I think of which it's why kind of Josh Allen is the MVP favorite for sure. He's the MVP favorite. I think he's like minus 470. I think that's a bit much. And I think the reason those bettings are there is because they know of the fatigue that's going on in the MVP race. But honestly, Lamar could easily be the MVP too. And I think if he didn't win it last year, he would be the winner this year. And last year, I think it was just a super weak MVP class. I think Tyreek Hill or CMC probably should have won it if they were able to play another game or two. Even if they didn't, I still think I would have given it to McCaffrey. Not just being a McCaffrey fan, I think just that was my opinion objectively back then. But I just think this is Lamar's best season of his career. I think we look at the MVPs and say, okay, well, this year he has no MVP. The past 2 years he did, so he's kind of fallen off. No, this is he's been the same here. He's been better than any other season he's ever had. And obviously the running game with Derrick Henry has helped that for sure. But I just think this Bills defense, this is not an ideal matchup for them. This is the worst thing they could have won. The Ravens defense, I think mainly the secondary, has played much better over the past few weeks. And to be honest, this is a personal thing with a few things to back it up. I don't trust this coaching matchup with Sean McDermott. I don't. Even if they win this game, I'm going to say it, I don't think Sean McDermott will win a Super Bowl as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And if he does, Josh Allen has to go on one of the greatest quarterback runs of all time, because I don't think he lifts the team up. I think there have been plenty of times where he's mismanaged games. We've seen it obviously most recently in the Houston Texans game that I've had to mention. It doesn't happen all the time, but just keep your eye, just look, just watch sometimes. He is almost got and I'm a Panthers fan. I think Ron Rivera was better, but he almost has a Ron Rivera kind of feel where he's like not bad and he's able to, get these guys together and you view him positively. But when you go in, sometimes it's like, okay, like, why did you do this? Or like, I don't know if this is the best idea. Again, I feel like Ron Rivera approached it better and he made a Super Bowl. So, hey, if you make a Super Bowl, you can win one maybe. But in my opinion, I just don't view him as a coach that I really trust. And I know that sometimes it doesn't matter because the Eagles made the Super Bowl with Sirianni. At least Sirianni has an identity of like, I'm aggressive, I'm going for it, whatever. I don't think Sean really does. And Joe Brady has kind of been the biggest thing here of having a great offensive coordinator season, which objectively good for him. But my main reason I picked him was I said the defense. And that's why, for Buffalo. That's my personal opinion. And not opinion, but it's a fact of the Bills' run defense is not as good. But in my opinion of why I think it'll be the biggest difference maker in this game. So I am personally going Buffalo. I know it's a road game. I know Buffalo's the most – I've seen them the most in terms of Super Bowl picks, in terms of at least the fan favorite. That's definitely the big one is Buffalo. I'm going to be the spoiler. I'm going Baltimore in this game. What are you picking?
10 for 10. I'm going Baltimore in this game as well.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, I think a lot of what you said is
anything new to add. Yeah.
I would just say just the rushing attack, what I mentioned earlier with the Bills and how kind of weak they are on the interior of their defensive line. We saw Derrick Henry have a few explosive runs the first matchup. I think the Bills are a little bit healthier now. Look with their linebacking core. Matt Milano should be playing in this game. I'm not sure if Terrell Bernard played when they faced off earlier in the season, so maybe their linebacking core helps a little bit, but I still think with how the physical offensive line for the Ravens is up front, I just think it's going to be hard for them to stop the rushing attack of Lamar and Henry. I will say for the Ravens, Lamar just kind of scares me in the postseason because he really hasn't played well at any playoff run. That's kind of the difference with like him and Lamar. I mean, Josh Allen. Like Allen hasn't had, I guess, the same postseason success as you would expect for someone like as his talent. But it's not like Allen.
But if you look at
he doesn't play bad.
I mean, if you look at who's he beaten in the play? Exactly, you mentioned it. Who's he beaten in the playoffs? I don't really think he's really had a. I mean, he's been good in head-to-head matchups, but he hasn't won a significant head-to-head matchup.
I think in terms of that's what I mean. Like in terms of him leading a team to a win, but I still think in terms of individual performances, he's done good. Like he's gone up against the Chiefs and put up like 5 touchdowns, and his defense couldn't get a stop with 13 seconds. Like how is that Josh Allen's fault? Lamar Jackson hasn't. We saw him last year against Kansas City at home. He was atrocious in that game. And so I've seen Josh Allen, although he's lost to the Chiefs several times, he plays fairly well, like more than good
And they
enough
did
to
beat
win,
them.
like every time. Yeah. So I just think that's something I'm scared of is like Lamar Jackson kind of has that like Joel Embiid / like James Harden feel to him now, where like every regular season, he's going to be a dominant player, be an MVP front runner, but where's the postseason, performances? Because nobody's gonna like after this year. I'm just not going to care about what Lamar does in the regular season anymore. Like, okay, it's cool. You got a couple MVPs. You're always going to be the MVP, favorite. But if you want to be seen as like one of the best quarterbacks of all time, you got to start having some real success in the postseason
Yeah.
and go on some
Yeah,
deep
you
runs.
bring up the Embiid and Harden stuff. I don't think that's a bad comparison. The only thing I would say is I don't think that right now because he's had years where he's been hurt and everything, and maybe the team made the playoffs or they didn't make the playoffs because of this and that. So I think they haven't made as many playoffs as we really think. But I thought last year the Ravens were the best team in the NFL, and I had them winning the Super Bowl, I think. And yeah, I did. And they had that game, and they should have honestly. I mean, they were the best team, and Lamar did not perform. So I understand your talks about that.
And then even in
and
like
I see that for sure.
I think it was like 2019 when they were like maybe the number one seed or close to it when the Titans came on the road.
Titans game, yep.
He played horrible in that game too. So it's like at some point.
Yeah, no, I agree. Concerns. Only thing is though, I think in these games he's played better defenses. This Bills defense is not. I think it's not as good as people think.
Yeah,
So
I agree on that point.
This is not as good of a defense.
The Bills' defense has definitely not been great this year. Their safeties are probably one of the worst in the league. I mean, they have DeMar Hamlin.
I think they're pretty overrated.
Yeah.
I think people don't really think about that. So that's why we have it. But both of us, we picked
I don't think their defense is good. So I think Baltimore could definitely move it up and down the field. And actually, Baltimore's defense was bad for majority of this season, but they made a ton of like personnel changes. They moved Kyle Hamilton back to safety. They benched I think Marcus Williams I think as their other safety.
Yes, and then Nate Higgins, the corner from Clemson, has played really well as of recent.
So they made a couple of tweaks in their secondary. Some players have kind of improved their play, and so they've been playing a lot better. I think they were like one of the top defenses in the league like the last month or so of the season after those changes. So they're kind of riding into these playoffs on a good momentum boost as well. So I'm going to pick Baltimore, but I easily, of course, could just see this being Allen's year.
Yeah, this is a coin flip. I think I could see this as a coin flip game. I just, looking at it, I can say if I had to put big money betting or really argue with someone about it, I can do that in favor of Baltimore. But I can still say it's a very close game and potential coin flip. We can still
for sure. That. I mean, yeah, maybe this is just Allen and the Bills' year, and
could be, could
So.
definitely be. And now we have the conference championship. I'm telling you, we did not look at each other's list. We've had every single thing. I promise you, we didn't. We did not. And I really thought he would have the Bills or maybe a different, the Vikings or something. And I probably thought I'd have the same thing too, but. Maybe it changes here. I don't know. Let's start off with Philadelphia at Detroit. NFC title game. This, obviously, a pretty hard game to pick. But this was the obvious game. This is, I think both of us had this. I can't remember if you did or not. At the beginning of the year, I remember I did. This was the NFC title game. I don't think anyone had a question about it. This has been the NFC title game for us, especially me, since the beginning of the season. Nothing's really changed. It's just been who's going to win this game. I kind of went back and forth. I had the Eagles at first, and then I switched to the Lions right at the start of the season. In terms of just players playing on the field, the Eagles just do have the better roster. They just do. And I can say that especially due to the Lions' injuries. The Lions have the best offensive metrics, though, of any team, and it's not like all these injuries happened at the very big end of the year. They happened slightly at the beginning and then just throughout the season. They will have Montgomery back 100% for this game specifically. The offensive line and defensive line for both teams, it's going to be a huge battle, especially the two O-lines. These are the best two offensive lines in the country. Or I'm talking college. In the NFL. They both rely on the run. Pretty similar. Some of the best running teams in the NFL behind the Ravens. Both teams have high-caliber offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators with really aggressive head coaches. But I just think the Lions do have the better edge in terms of what I just mentioned with scheme, coordinators, head coach. I think when you just compare the two, the Lions win all three. And of these two quarterbacks, since both the teams can actually run, I think it's going to come down to really key passing situations. And these Eagles wide receivers versus the Lions defensive backs is a huge advantage for them in comparison to the Eagles defensive backs versus the Lions receivers. That might be a huge mismatch that could really spell this game. But I think the key is really going to be pressure. The Lions are much higher in pressure rate, and Hurts under pressure is just not good. He's even worse than Matthew Stafford. He's just not good. And I think they'll have a very similar game plan as to what they did against the Vikings and probably what they're going to do against the Rams. And I think that's because all three of these quarterbacks under pressure are significantly worse. And Darnold during the year honestly wasn't really like that, and I think they just did a really good job in that game. But they'll have a similar game plan going in, and again, the only thing I worry about is the secondary. But I think having the Lions' top-tier safeties in the back is really going to help, especially against Hurts. Sometimes Hurts can really just get pressure, go back, chuck it up, and with two safeties back there, like Kirby Joseph, he's just coming down with that. Brian Branch, he's just getting rid of that. These guys are not going to really take that back there. Alex Anzalone coming back helps a lot as well. He was pretty good in that Vikings game. Again, the Eagles roster is objectively better on the field, but the better roster does not always win, let alone the Super Bowl. Or the best roster doesn't always win the Super Bowl, let alone a singular game. So while the Lions could show some kind of more struggle in terms of maybe offensively than we would expect, because the Eagles defense is better than the Lions defense against the Eagles offense, I trust the Lions offense in a late game scenario more than I trust the Eagles. I really prefer the coaching matchup here. So I understand the Eagles pick, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go with Detroit in this matchup to make the Super Bowl out of the NFC.
I said really from the beginning of the season, I felt like this was just going to be the fast track matchup that we, just simulate the season. This was going to be the game for the NFC.
Yeah, for the NFC.
Yeah, Eagles, Lions. I think anybody that kind of followed along football kind of, predicted that. I mean, it wasn't super hard to see that those two were the, top teams in that conference.
Yeah, I mean, unless you really, the Packers and the Rams, I think people had some good stuff about them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree.
So I think what comes down to this game is the home field for me. I just think Ford Field hosting the NFC Championship game, that place is going to be absolutely bananas. I just like Detroit, I think, this year. I was a little bit scared of them, I won't lie, leading up until I would say like the final couple of games because of how bad their defense was. Just with all those injuries, I was like, man, are the Lions going to get screwed out? Like, because if you go to the beginning of the season with how this team was playing, you were like, okay, this is going to be the Super Bowl. It's going to be them versus whoever in the AFC.
Whoever comes out of the AFC, yep.
And then they had injury. I mean, it was like every single week they're losing 2 players. And I think they're going to get a couple of those guys back.
They have a ton of corners out, like Carlton Davis, a bunch of other guys. Aleem McNeil is out. Like Derek Barnes, Terrion Arnold's got injured. Emmanuel Mosley, Aiden Hutchinson, obviously. So yeah, and Marcus Davenport. Yeah, they've had a defensive specifically. I agree. I've been kind of worried about some of their injuries that have occurred.
So I was really scared a couple weeks ago, and then the Vikings game, it kind of restored some faith in me that maybe getting a couple of those guys back, like Anzalone. I think Arnold, they said he's just day-to-day. He's going to be fine, after the bye week. So, I mean, that helps. I don't know the status on, like, Carlton Davis, if he's, like, out for the season or, a couple of other guys. I know that McNeil, I think he, like, tore his ACL, so he's done. I know Hutchinson, they said maybe if they make the Super Bowl, he'll have an outside chance to play in that game. But I don't know.
Hutchinson is the only one from what I've seen that has potential to play.
Okay.
Carlton Davis is supposed to be out for the playoffs.
Okay. So, yeah, so they're probably not going to get back many more players, but I do think if they can get a lot of pressure, like you were saying, just a lot of blitz-heavy games and just force a couple of turnovers, that's going to be their route. And, of course, you're going to need their offense to be pretty much flawless, and I just think having home field is going to be massive for them, and I'm just going to take Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, kind of that operation over Philly, which I respect them a lot, just especially the front office with how they're able to build their team every year. But I don't know. I think part of it is just I kind of want the Lions to win. I'm not a huge fan of Philly, and it's always cool
Oh
to
yeah.
see a team that has never ever won anything be able to make it to their first Super Bowl. So yeah, I'm gonna
And I
pick
think just
Detroit.
I think just the identity too of the team with Dan Campbell, it fits perfectly. It
Yeah.
literally fits perfectly, and I'm think while people maybe would be worried or something about maybe what his effect is on the team, their coordinators are awesome. They're
hmm
both going to be gone. They're both going to be head coaches. So this is the year. This
Yep.
has got to be the year.
A lot of
Um,
definitely trying to just maximize what they have this year for sure.
yes. So now we have Baltimore, Kansas City. We'll see if we're different in this matchup.
I hope
We
so.
might be, maybe.
I
I'm
hope
not
so.
sure.
I hope so.
And it's Baltimore at Kansas City. Whether it is Baltimore or the Bills, obviously this is going to be the hardest game to pick. Aside from maybe the Super Bowl, this is personally one of the hardest games to pick for me. And I could go all over with different stats that I want and everything, but in reality, I can't do that because they mostly come out in favor for the Ravens. They do. But that was literally what it was last year. And the Ravens were at home last year. Lamar had a bad game, and they had fumbles that objectively just didn't bounce their way. While the Chiefs had 2 fumbles, Ravens had 2, and the Ravens didn't recover any. The Chiefs recovered both, and that was just a big 2-turnover swing, also with an interception that was just on a deep throw that Lamar had. That was a bad decision. It was a game. They also had a missed kick, I believe. It was a game they totally should have won, and they were the better team, and they blew it. They did. And that's why this is so hard, because of the playoff history. And now that it's at Kansas City, the Ravens are one of the most penalized teams in the NFL. That really worries me. Justin Tucker has not been on his A game. That worries me. The Ravens and Kansas City, they are both some of the best third down teams offensively, but defensively, it does really go to the Ravens, especially in the red zone. And the Ravens' red zone offense has been much better. Kansas City blitzes at some of the highest rates in the NFL, and Lamar is the best quarterback when he's blitzed and pressured. Doesn't matter. He's the best. He literally is graded better than some quarterbacks when the pocket is just kept clean for them. That's how good he has been this year when blitzed and under pressure. And it's just better than any year ever that he's had. And Kansas City, while not bad, they're going to have to do a lot to stop the run versus the Ravens. And I think if the Ravens lose, it's really going to be based on Lamar losing them the game, which the conversation we just talked about is literally right there, and why we might be scared to even pick them against the Bills. And he's literally done it before, and it was literally last time in the playoffs. And obviously, you look at other stuff within these games, but I think obviously, bringing up Kansas City, they are what they are in terms of their record. It's been very good. I still think even if maybe 1 or 2 calls didn't go their way, they're still the 1 seed. They just still are. And I think in terms of this team, this really reminds me of last year. It really does. This was the AFC title game last year. The Ravens were at home. They were the better team. And throughout the regular season, in terms of stats, at least specifically, and it didn't matter. The Chiefs just went on, and they just won. And that's why it's so hard for me to pick this game. And when you look at it, at least for this year, these two teams did play each other at the very beginning of the year at Kansas City. And the Ravens obviously barely lost on a foot that wasn't in touchdown. The game would have gone to overtime, so it does not guarantee a Ravens win. And looking back now, Kansas City has lost much more than Baltimore since that time. Their run game, even with Isaiah Pacheco back, he's still really having to get back into it. Travis Kelce's age, I think, this is the worst regular season he's had, and I know he turned it up in the playoffs last year. Can he do it to the same degree this year? I really don't know, because the regular season has been significantly worse than what it's normally been. Again, this is so hard, and I said I would never pick against the Chiefs, but I'm doing it. I'm picking against the Chiefs. I'm going with the Ravens in the Super Bowl. I'm gonna get eaten up by the stats. I have to. The only thing backing me in this game is with the Chiefs is just hyperbole or like hypothetical stuff, and I can't even say that because it's literally happened. It literally happened last year. I know that, but I just we've had years where the Patriots lose and Manning wins the Super Bowl or another team makes the Super Bowl. That has occurred. And I think the insanity of them doing this feat is just boggles my mind. I will say, I think if they make the Super Bowl, I'm picking them to win, the Chiefs. But in this scenario, I'm going to have Baltimore win, and I'm doing it. I'm putting them in the Super Bowl versus Detroit. Do we have the same Super Bowl, or are we literally perfect on everything up into the Super Bowl?
Well, first, I just want to say, is Kansas City really just going to keep getting away, just squeaking out these wins?
I don't know.
For like
That's why I'm
two
scared.
straight years now where they just find a way. They just find a way to win a game, just the craziest ways possible. I mean, it seems like every week. I guess they've been blowing out teams towards the end of this season, kind of getting in postseason shape.
Relatively. But I think the teams they played towards the end have not been as good anyways.
Yeah, but I mean, they had a blocked field goal win. They had that weird like false start kind of muff fumble with the Raiders win. I mean, they've won literally every single way. So are they going to be able to do that again? That is just going to be really fascinating to watch it. To just have that voodoo kind of championship DNA magic still on their side. But I went ahead and picked Baltimore in this game as well.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Same everything.
I was I think I was telling you earlier, like a couple months ago, maybe it was like a month or so ago, that Kansas City I just didn't really feel it with them this year. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it feels like last year, but I don't know. I just can't fathom.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. This was what it was last year. They were not the better team analytically, everything else. They weren't, and they just turned it up in the playoffs. That's the only reason I'm scared.
I can't fathom, though, just a team doing that for so long and just getting all these breaks to go their way. I just can't fathom it. And there's been no three-peat ever in the NFL. Are we really going to see the Chiefs do that? I mean, no team has done it because of how hard it is and how much luck you need.
And I would say the NFL is more talented now than it was. Obviously, it's kind of just realistic. It's more talented now than it has been in a while.
And then, so Baltimore,
ever, you could say.
Baltimore, you got that whole like revenge thing. Like they beat us last year on our home turf. It's time for us to do it against them. I think that kind of plays in a little bit of a factor, something that I kind of look into. So very interesting game. Obviously, like I talked kind of a lot of trash on Lamar just as a playoff performer, and I have him going all the way to the Super Bowl. So I'm kind of falling into that trap again where I'm believing in Lamar, but
well, if that you're never going to do it again until he proves you wrong.
That's true.
If they mess up. And I think that's why I picked this game because again, you got to look at it. This is his best year. It just is. And I think the reason they lost that game, which was by 7 points, by the way, last year, and then this year it was also by 7 points, and then the playoff game specifically, it was Lamar. It was just him, and I think he's shown he's been good and better against, defenses that are capable. But is it possible where he has another bad game because this Chiefs defense is too much for him? Yeah, totally is.
Yep.
And they can make it. But I think you also, like you said, got to look at the Chiefs side and say, hey, how many times is this going to keep happening? Even just thinking about the law of averages, like how many times is this possibly going to keep occurring when this team just analytically, statistically is not what it should be. It's just not in the position they should be. But because of the name and the coaching and the history, we pick them, but they earned it. They've earned that right, So, yeah, I agree. I think it's there's not a perfect team. There's not a perfect team in this playoffs. There really isn't. There's negatives you could say about every team, and all of them are pretty valid. I in my opinion, I think. But wow, yeah, I'm sorry. We did not go over this. We have these same exact playoffs and now the same Super Bowl, and I will see if it is the same here. Oh my gosh! All right, Baltimore versus Detroit in the Super Bowl. Both of these, I think, are seen in terms of like key stats, analytics. Both of these have been really seen as the two best teams in the NFL. Again, this is projecting. Anything could change, maybe really beyond the wild card round, injuries and stuff like that. Again, Detroit in this game, they could have Aiden Hutchinson coming back. while he might not be 100%, him at 75, 80% is still massive. These are two quarterbacks looking for their first Super Bowl. And while I think there could be, again, I could do this big lead-up thing for it with bringing up stats here and there. You've already heard most of the stats for each team. Obviously, both are amazing on third down. They're really good in all these key scenarios, third down, red zone. I think I can just bring up kind of the Lions, playing other top-tier quarterbacks and how they've fared there of terms of, guys like Josh Allen and running quarterbacks really struggling to stop them and losing games at home, by the way. Or Baltimore showing some real vulnerability against a team similar to them in the loss to the Eagles that they had at home. And there's just so many different stuff you could really look at. But when looking at the quarterbacks, at least right now, this is Lamar's best year. And Goff is good, but he's obviously not perfect. And when I compare these defenses, it really brings me back to the Bills game. And again, even if it's Kansas City, if they face Kansas City, at this point, I think they just have a healthier, more proven defense than Detroit. And if this is Detroit versus Baltimore in February, depending on how each team plays, if this is really the Super Bowl, it could be subject to change if the Lions defense does better. That's the only thing really holding me back. And while the Ravens aren't perfect at all with their penalties, not an elite pass rush, the secondary has been inconsistent, they're hitting their stride and all that stuff. They have really good matchups going up here, and it's all going to be up to Lamar. I'm really putting my faith in Lamar here. It's his best season. We'll see if it can show in the playoffs. I will be wearing a Stafford blue jersey with a Lions hat if they are in the Super Bowl. I don't care who they are playing. I did it last year with McCaffrey and the Niners. But if I had to pick right now and pick a champion, looking at it all, I am going to go with the Ravens. I'm going to go with the Ravens, and it is purely because of the difference maker at quarterback. I think there are times, obviously, where you look at the Super Bowl, the quarterback normally who's better wins, but that's not always the case based on the team. But I think if that would be the thing, the other quarterback just has to not really be that much of a difference maker, and the defense has to be insane. In this case, the quarterback is that much of a difference maker, and the defense is not insane. They are good, but they are banged up and not insane. So that is why I'm going with the Baltimore Ravens to get over the hump. Not insanely confidently, just it's really hard, and I picked the Lions earlier, but I'm going to go with them in this game. Who do you have winning the Super Bowl, Mathis?
It's just unbelievable. I also have the Baltimore Ravens taking down the Lions.
Wow. Okay. We did not communicate this at all. I thought you were going to go so many different ways, but you probably thought the same
You
about
should have let me
well.
answer some predictions first so they didn't think I was just copying your answer.
Yeah, no, I should. Yeah. Jeez.
No, that's unbelievable. But yeah, I think Baltimore, I saw something that resonated with me during, I want to say their last game. Who they play again? I can't remember. The Browns maybe was their last game of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Some fan had like a poster. It was like 2000, 2012, and then 2024 question mark. So like each like 12 years, the Ravens have won the Super Bowl. So I don't know. I just thought that was, I just thought it was a little interesting. But I thought, I just think Baltimore peaking at the right time. I think you touched on it a lot. Just their overall talent. Again, Lamar, he scares me making this prediction. Like I could easily just see the Steelers, who have had great success against Lamar, just bottling him up and somehow winning just a super ugly football game and then wiping out our Super Bowl pick in the first round. Like that's not inconceivable for happening, but I don't know. I just feel like the Ravens, it's their kind of time to have some revenge this year. And just with how Lamar's playing, how their defense is playing now, Derrick Henry giving them another element in the cold. I just think as long as they don't get in their own way, I just think Baltimore just has the coaching and the roster talent to go up against anybody. And I think Lamar Jackson, I think he's going to make a couple plays to get them to this spot. And I think with how banged up the Lions defense is, I just think Baltimore makes the most sense for me. So
I agree. And I think I just want to bring this up. I was almost not going to pick him because I am a little scared of their special teams. Like if they need a field goal or something to win a game,
Yeah.
Justin Tucker's not been on his A game. But I think the biggest thing for me is I think if the roster talent, again, like we keep saying with the Lions, was more healthy, I think it would make me feel more confident, specifically based on Dan Campbell. I think Dan Campbell is going to probably lose them a football game in this playoffs. I think he's the reason they're here. He's the reason they're in the playoffs, the 1 seed. They're going to win a few games, maybe in this playoffs, at least one, because of something he does. But I think he's going to just not really change his philosophy in mind, and he's going to do something when he just doesn't have the necessary maybe personnel to do it, or maybe he's going up against a group where maybe his mindset is, I don't care, I'm going to do this, that, where he maybe should care, in a situation where he doesn't care, and I think it might really screw him over, and we're going to be looking back, and he's going to be apologizing on the podium about something. I can just picture that in my head. So, again, I assume I'll speak for you as well. We are rooting for the Lions.
Oh, yeah.
I'm definitely rooting for the Lions to win the Super Bowl. I really, really want them to. My grandfather's been a Lions fan forever. He lives there. My Lions are like my second or third team. It's kind of just been, kind of slightly low key or whatever, but I have a Stafford jersey, baby blue Stafford jersey when I was like in middle school or whatever. Like, I'm so happy this team is doing well. I'll be rooting for them. Again, maybe it changes. Both of us can sit here and say maybe Ravens limp into the playoffs, maybe Lions do much better than we think, and we can obviously change our pick as it goes. But we've done this for 2 years, I think. Never have we had the same playoffs.
That's
and
crazy.
I promise you we did not have the same stuff here.
13 for
but that-
13.
Insane, actually insane. And I looked into a good amount and tried to loop stuff, and he looked into some stuff as well and kind of went off based on, kind of his previous thinking and everything. And it just, maybe it's the perfect bracket. I don't know. Maybe this is what you really need to go off of. If both of us are giving it to you,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you should go put your money down. But that is our playoff predictions. Thank you again, Mathis, for coming on the channel. And we will come back maybe. Obviously, we have our quarterback rankings video that always is going to be out. And then we also have the NFL draft that's coming up. And we'll do draft videos on
Can't
this
wait.
channel mostly. We'll probably do maybe one on mine. We do some fun stuff. We'll be looking into the prospects pretty deeply. So we'll have some good talks about that as well. But thanks again, Mathis, for coming on. And as always, stay smart, stay sharp, and I will see you guys later. Peace.